You are mine now. Here you will see famous people and celebrities who will use you however they want. And if you try to run away or tell anyone, I will kill you and your family.
Twin sisters were one of P. Diddy's victims, but they managed to escape. And in this video, we have the opportunity to hear their story, where they recount everything they did with the American rapper, famous Hollywood actors, and even international singers. All of this at P. Diddy's parties. Imagine two twin sisters, young and full of dreams. Just 14 years old, Leila and Emma Carter wanted to conquer Hollywood and become big movie stars. When they received an invitation to live in California and participate in exclusive auditions, it seemed like the chance of a lifetime. But as they crossed the doors of a world that was supposed to be made of glamour, they discovered the darker side of Hollywood. Suddenly, they found themselves trapped in a network of abuse run by one of the most powerful men in the industry, P. Diddy. Their lives changed forever. Now, after years of silence, Leila and Emma are ready to reveal the darkest secrets of a scheme that no one dared expose before diving into this terrifying story. Subscribe to the channel to follow more shocking stories like this, and share this video to warn others of the true monster that P. Diddy is. The sisters' story begins like this.
When my sister Emma and I were little, we always dreamed big. There was nothing that fascinated us more than the lights of Hollywood, the stars on the red carpets, and the films we watched on the old TV in our living room. From the age of 10, we rehearsed plays and imagined what it would be like to live in California, surrounded by famous directors and cameras pointed at us Everything looked so glamorous. We were 14 years old when this dream took us straight to the worst nightmare of our lives. It was an ordinary day in our small, rural Ohio town when a well-dressed man approached us. He introduced himself as Victor Stokes, a talent agent from Los Angeles. He said he had seen our photos on a local website for young artists and that he saw a great future for us. His voice was confident, his smile charming. I remember how he said, "You guys have something unique, something Hollywood is desperately looking for." We believed him. Why wouldn't we believe it? Victor made us a proposal that seemed like something out of a fairy tale. He offered flights to California, a luxurious apartment, and meetings with some of the biggest names in the industry. "You will meet people who can change your lives," he said. He even mentioned that one of his contacts was the legendary rapper P. Diddy, someone who could open all the doors for our career. Our parents were hesitant. They wanted us to succeed. But something in my father's eyes said he didn't trust Victor. Still, after several calls, Victor convinced us all that it was a unique opportunity. He even promised to personally supervise everything and assured us that we would be safe. Emma and I were so excited we couldn't wait to get on board. When we finally arrived in California, it felt like we had been transported to another world. Victor took us straight to a modern building in Los Angeles, a place that shone with luxury and exclusivity. He showed us to our apartment, a penthouse with a view of the city. Everything was impeccable. Leather furniture, huge windows, and even a pool on the terrace. Victor assured us that it was the beginning of our road to stardom. But looking back, that place was never home. He was a trap, a captivity disguised as glamour. I would give everything I have to never have accepted that invitation. I remember how on the first night the silence was strange, oppressive. There were no neighbors, just a constant echo of our footsteps on the marble floor. Over the next few days, Victor started taking us to auditions and parties. But something was wrong. The auditions were empty. No other candidates, no directors, just dark rooms with old cameras. And the parties, they were worse. Young women like us, all well-dressed, but with blank expressions. Powerful men who watched us as if we were goods for sale. It was at one of these parties that we met him, P. Diddy. I remember how cold I felt when he entered the room. The music stopped for a moment, as if the world recognized his presence. He was charismatic, smiling, but his eyes, they were cold, calculating. He greeted us, asked about our dreams, and said he could make them come true. "But I demand loyalty," he said. "Do you trust me?" I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this famous and powerful man really saw potential in me and Emma. But there was something about the way he looked at us that made my skin crawl. He wasn't looking at actresses. He was looking for prey. Despite all this, the first days in Los Angeles seemed like a dream. Victor made a point of constantly reminding us that we were experiencing something that few girls could achieve. "You have no idea how lucky you are," he would say, as he took us to expensive restaurants and showed us around film studios. But little by little, that shine began to fade, and cracks began to appear. In the following auditions, everything seemed wrong. Victor took us to a decaying building in the city center, completely different from the glamour we imagined and what he had shown in the first few days. The room was small, with peeling walls and a single worn sofa. In the corner, he said that it was normal in the beginning, that the great directors preferred a more intimate environment. There was no one waiting for us, just a camera on a tripod and some vague instructions from Victor. "Do your best. Be stunning." When we asked who would see our recordings, he just smiled and said, "Trust me." Then came the parties. They were completely different from the parties we saw in the movies. Instead of laughter and celebrations, there was an awkward silence among the guests. The men, always much older, talked to each other as if they owned the place, while the girls like us huddled in the corners, trying to appear at ease. It was at one of these parties that something inside me began to break. We were in a gigantic mansion in Beverly Hills, surrounded by young women, some wearing extremely luxurious clothes, others visibly out of place, as if they didn't belong there. The men watched everything from afar, as if they were choosing the next target from a menu. I remember hearing something like, "How much does that blonde cost?" I get goosebumps just remembering. That night, Diddy approached us again. He smiled and asked how we were adapting. Emma, ever the optimist, said she was loving the experience. I was silent. Something about the way he spoke bothered me, as if his words carried a hidden meaning. He handed us small gifts, expensive watches, designer bags, and said he wanted to take us to a special dinner soon. "It's an opportunity that could change everything," he promised, his voice soft and almost hypnotic. Victor confirmed it's the kind of invitation you can't refuse. But that night, as we walked back to the apartment, I noticed that Emma was uncomfortable too. "Something about him scares me," she said. I agreed. But what could we do? We were just two 14-year-old girls, far from home, with no one but Victor and Diddy to trust. The following days brought more parties and auditions, but always with the same oppressive feeling. There were security guards everywhere, doors that remained locked. And Victor started to be more controlling, saying that we couldn't go out alone or answer our parents' calls without his supervision. One night, I tried to ask about the directors who would see our auditions. Victor gave me a look that I will never forget, a look that was anything but friendly. "You don't need to worry about that, Lila. Just do as they ask." That's enough. That's when I realized we were trapped in something much bigger than we could understand at the time. Hollywood's false shine was beginning to crumble, but the worst was yet to come. At that point, we still didn't know that we were being prepared to become the property of a man who saw humanity as disposable. That night was the turning point. Emma and I were invited to what Victor described as the big break. He was excited, saying that Diddy wanted to meet us at a private dinner. "You're going to love it," he insisted, as he handed us expensive dresses that looked more appropriate for a parade than a dinner party. I wanted to believe it was a real opportunity, but my heart was heavy. Emma, always trying to calm me down, said, "Everything will be fine, Lila. Maybe he really can help us." But something in me knew we were entering dangerous territory. When we arrived at the restaurant, We were taken to a VIP room in the back, away from the noise and people. The space was opulent, with golden walls, crystal chandeliers, and a huge table in the center where Diddy was already sitting. He stood up when he saw us, his smile wide and welcoming, but his eyes had that cold gleam that I couldn't ignore. "Finally, the stars of my next project," he said, holding out his hands to us. He made us sit next to him, one on each side, while Victor stood like a guard at the back of the room. Diddy started talking about opportunities. He described films, music videos, and partnerships with big brands. "I can take you wherever you want to go, but there is only one thing I demand: loyalty." His voice was sweet, but there was something behind it, an invisible force that made us feel like birds in a cage. When I asked what he meant by loyalty, he laughed, a laugh that echoed through the room like thunder. "You guys trust me, right? I only work with people who follow my rules." He was never direct to the point. He always used half words so that we could guess an answer, kind of to see how far we were willing to go. Dinner continued, but it was clear he was testing us. He asked personal questions, wanted to know about our family, our fears, our most secret dreams. It was like he was taking apart who we were, piece by piece. When the night was almost over, he asked us to stay a little longer. "Victor can go. I want to talk to them alone." Victor hesitated for a moment, but obeyed, leaving the room without question. That's when everything changed. Diddy closed the door with a slow movement, as if he wanted to prolong our anxiety. He looked at us, but this time his smile was gone. He looked like a predator studying his prey. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked. But before we could respond, he continued. "You are special. You have something that others don't have. I can give you everything, but I need to make sure you will reciprocate. Always." His words were like a trap closing. Emma tried to say something, but he interrupted her, placing his hand on her shoulder tightly. "Don't interrupt when I'm talking." His voice was low, but it carried a threat that froze the air in the room. I tried to get up, but he came closer, pushing me back into the chair. "You're not going anywhere. Not until I say yes." That was the first time I felt real fear. Not the kind of fear that goes away. The kind that stays, that follows you, that turns even the smallest sound into a warning of danger. At that moment, I understood that we were not invited. In that room, we were prisoners. When we finally left that dinner, we were escorted by security to a car. They didn't let us go back to the apartment alone, and Victor was waiting for us outside with a disconcerting smile. He didn't ask anything about what happened. He just said, "Welcome to the game." Whatever had started that night, we knew it wasn't about Hollywood dreams anymore. It was something much darker, much more dangerous. We weren't actresses. We were the property of a man who believed he could do anything to anyone. From that night, everything changed. Emma and I no longer had control over our lives. The promises of fame, movie roles, and brilliant opportunities evaporated like smoke. The apartment Victor gave us, which once seemed like a luxurious retreat, was now a prison. Security guards were always present, watching our every move. Our parents, messages, and calls began to be monitored. When we tried to express our concerns or asked to go home, Victor would appear with a stern expression and a phrase that soon became a mantra. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." That's when the real nightmare began. A few nights after dinner with Diddy, we were taken to a place that Victor called a special event. It was in a secluded mansion, far from any busy areas. The house was luxurious, but carried a heavy atmosphere. Inside, there were other girls, young like us, some even younger. They were all silent, with their eyes downcast and their bodies showing marks of violence. Diddy showed up later that night, surrounded by men in suits and armed security guards. He ignored us at first, chatting with his associates while drinking and laughing as if nothing was wrong. But when he finally turned to us, it was as if the air had left the room. "Welcome to my world," he said, smiling as if he was doing us a favor. He pointed to the other girls and continued, "You are part of something much bigger now. Follow the rules and everything will be easier." His rules were clear and cruel. We could not leave the property without authorization. We couldn't talk to anyone outside the circle. We could not question his orders. That night, we were taken to a huge room with mirror walls, lit only by a dim lamp on the ceiling. Diddy entered, accompanied by two men who didn't say a word. He approached us, his face just inches from mine. "You belong to me now," he said calmly, but the weight of the words was like a knife in my chest. Emma tried to argue. She said that this was not what we had agreed on, that we wanted to leave. His response was a slap across your face, which echoed in the silence of the room. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "I am untouchable. You are nothing. They are my whores now. But if they obey me, they could be something in the future. So follow the rules." From then on, we became prisoners of a rotten system. There were parties, meetings, and events where we were forced to smile and pretend that we were there of our own free will. Celebrities who have already won Oscars, who are still in the media today, and pretend to be good people, actors, singers, and don't be fooled into thinking they were just men. The powerful men who frequented those places looked at us as if we were commodities. And in fact, we were being commodities. Each day we felt our identities being erased. We were no longer Lila and Emma. I say that it seemed to be above any law because I was tired of seeing police officers inside that house. Professionals who should have been saving us were using us. But the worst of all was knowing that we weren't alone in the tunnel that became our home. Dozens of other girls told us their stories in whispers, how they had been deceived, threatened, and violated. They had been there for months, even years, with no hope of escape. And we were beginning to understand that if we didn't do something, that would be our fate too. It was during this period that we discovered the truth about what really happened behind the curtains of Hollywood. That world of red, carpets, camera flashes, and big productions was a shiny facade that hid something dark and rotten. Every day, it became clearer that Diddy was just the tip of a gigantic iceberg, a system controlled by powerful men who fed on innocent dreams like ours. He was untouchable because whoever made the law was his friend. Whoever was the defender of the law was with him. The white parties and events we were forced to attend weren't just celebrations. They were markets. I saw how the men looked at us as if they were deciding the value of a product on the shelf. A few times, I heard Diddy close deals in a low voice. Names, amounts, dates. It was as if we were property. He was renting or selling every day new girls arrive, and some old ones disappear as if their expiration date was up. To this day, I have no idea where these teenagers are. It was at one of these parties that we realized that our lives would never be the same. Emma was quieter than usual, and I could sense something was worse than usual. As the loud music echoed through the halls of the mansion, I noticed that some girls simply disappeared in the middle of the party. They were led through dark corridors, and no one seemed to question it. That night, a man approached us. He was much older, and with all the certainty in the world. You who are listening to me know him. After all, he has already won several Oscars for the main films in the world. He had a fake smile and eyes that made me feel like I was naked. He looked at Diddy and pointed at Emma, saying something I couldn't hear. But Diddy's look of approval was enough to chill my blood. "She's new," he said, laughing casually, still learning the rules. Emma tried to get away, but the man grabbed her arm. That's when I intervened, holding her hand tightly and pulling her back. Diddy saw everything but said nothing. He just smiled, as if warning us there was no way out. Even though I was fighting, my sister was taken to one of the dark tunnels, and I'm scared, just thinking about it. At that same party, another girl named Marcy told us the truth. She had been there for 2 years, trying to survive. Diddy controls everything, she said with tears in her eyes. And even when he's not there, his system is. He has men everywhere. Even if you escape, he will find you. No one ever makes it out completely. Marcy told us about girls who had disappeared, who dared to disobey or try to run away. Some were simply never seen again. Others, well, the stories were too horrible to repeat. She also revealed that Diddy had ties to much bigger figures. Business people, politicians, even members of the law. That was why no one dared to challenge him. That was the underworld of Hollywood, a place where dreams were used as bait, where promises of success were just chains to enslave girls like us. The glamour that attracted us there was just a disguise. And at the center of it all was Diddy, the man who manipulated people like chess pieces, with no regard for their lives or souls. I started to lose hope. Emma, who had always been the most optimistic among us, no longer smiled. We weren't just physical prisoners. We were being broken from the inside, slowly, every day. But even in that darkness, a spark of resistance began to emerge within me. I could not accept that this was our destiny. We needed to get out of there. We needed to survive. But I knew that to escape, we would need more than courage. We would need luck. Because in that world, any mistake could mean the end. When I realized that we were being crushed by that system, something inside me began to change. The fear was still there, always present. But now it was accompanied by a growing anger. We could no longer wait for someone to save us. We needed to find a way to get out on our own, even if it meant risking everything. Emma, however, was increasingly fragile. I would see her crying softly at night as she looked out her apartment window, as if she was waiting for someone, anyone, to come get us. But no one would come. Diddy had completely isolated our lives. Our cell phones were monitored, our social networks were under control, and calls to our parents were always supervised by Victor. It was then that I started to observe everything around me more carefully. I noticed the patterns of the security guards who followed us at parties. They were rigorous, but not always perfect. At a smaller event, I saw that a side door was left unlocked as waiters came and went at the apartment. I noticed that one of the guards had a habit of leaving the elevator hallway unguarded for a few minutes while he changed shifts. It was a huge risk, but I knew it was our only chance. I began to mentally write down all these details while pretending to be obedient and submissive. We needed to make it seem like we had accepted our fate, that we were broken, like the other girls. Emma hesitated when I shared the plan with her. "What if they catch us?" she asked, eyes wide. I didn't have an answer. I knew that if we failed, the consequences would be worse than anything we had ever faced. But what would be worse? Living in this nightmare forever, or dying trying to escape? We chose the second option. We waited for weeks, maybe months, for the right moment. The opportunity came on a party night when Diddy was distracted entertaining his guests. The mansion was full, the noise was loud, and the smell of cigarettes and alcohol saturated the air. The security guards were more relaxed than usual, many busy with the guests. I knew exactly where to go. The side door that I saw open on another occasion was there, a few meters away from us. I grabbed Emma's hand tightly and pulled her away from the crowd, sneaking into an empty hallway. The silence there was deafening, and I could feel my heart beating in my chest like a drum. We got to the door, but there was a problem. It was locked. My stomach turned. We had come so far, and now it seemed like everything was going to fall apart. Emma started to cry, but I motioned for her to be silent. It was then that I heard footsteps. Security guards were approaching. I needed to think fast. I looked around and saw a small window at the top of the wall. It wasn't big, but maybe enough for us to pass through. With effort, I stacked some nearby boxes and helped Emma climb in. She was shaking, but managed to get through. I followed soon after, feeling the cool night air for the first time in months. We don't look back. We ran through what seemed like an endless garden, climbing over fences and through bushes until we finally reached the road. Behind us, the dogs started barking, and we heard voices shouting. They had found out. The next few minutes were a blur of terror. Emma and I ran without stopping, our bare feet bruised by the rocks on the road. At one point, we saw headlights approaching. For a moment, I thought it was the end, but it was an old truck. The driver, an elderly man, stopped when he saw us and asked if we were okay. "Please take us away from here," I begged, without explaining. He let us in and started driving. As we drove away, I heard the sound of gunshots in the distance. They were hunting us. Diddy wasn't the kind of man who accepted failures, much less escapes. But in that moment, at least for a moment, we were free. I knew that night wasn't the end of our nightmare, but it was the beginning of a fight for our survival. After escaping the mansion, the first thing we did was run to a payphone. I was shaking so much I could barely hold the device, but I needed to hear our parents' voices. When my mother answered, I couldn't hold back the tears. "Mommy, please help us. We're in danger," was all I could say, before Emma, next to me, sobbed in despair. My mother started asking quick questions, trying to understand what was happening. When my father picked up the phone, his voice was firm, but filled with concern. "Lila, tell me where you are. Your mother and I are going to get you, now." Without thinking much, I gave the name of the city and a vague description of the place where we were hiding. Emma was terrified and held me like she was afraid I would disappear. My father instructed us not to move, saying that they would immediately leave the house to get us. As we waited, the fear only increased. Every car that passed seemed to be theirs. Every shadow felt like a threat. When my parents finally arrived, my mother jumped out of the car and hugged us like she never wanted to let go. "We are here now," she said. "Everything will be fine." For a moment, I thought we really would be safe, but that moment was short-lived. The persecution began again, but now our parents were also targets. When we were on our way to a safe hotel, we noticed that a black car was following us. My father tried to lose them by turning into side streets and changing direction abruptly, but the car continued behind us. At the hotel, my father decided that we should rest while he and my mother planned our next move. After telling our parents everything that happened, we thought that calling the police was not a smart choice, considering that the police themselves frequented that house and were part of this criminal scheme. But before we could even relax, a loud knock on the door made us jump in fright. They found us. Emma screamed, desperate. My father looked through the peephole and saw 2 men in suits waiting outside. They didn't knock again so as not to alert other guests, but stood still as if they were watching us. My father whispered, "Get your things. We leave now." We went down the fire exit, leaving the car behind. We walked through the dark streets until we found a taxi, my father giving quick instructions to take us somewhere far away. It was at that moment that I realized that our parents were just as vulnerable as we were. They tried to protect Emma and me at all costs, but Diddy and his men were always one step ahead. As we moved cities, the threats kept coming. One night, we got a note on the windshield of our rental car. "Do you think you can outrun me? You will all pay." My father began arming himself with whatever he could. buying a knife at a convenience store and telling us to stay together at all times. "If they come after you, I will face them," he said. But the fear in his eyes was evident. The threats began to escalate. During a brief stop at a cafe, my mother noticed a man in a suit taking photos of us from afar. When he realized he was seen, he hurriedly left. On another occasion, while we were driving on a deserted road, an SUV tried to push us off the road. Emma and I started to feel guilty. "They're after us," Emma said. "We are putting our parents in danger, but they didn't let us give up." "You are our daughters," my father said. "We will protect you, no matter the cost." But Diddy seemed omnipresent. We managed to find shelter in an isolated cabin, thanks to a trusted family friend. There, for a brief moment, we had peace. But soon a neighbor reported seeing strange people hanging around the area. It was like Diddy knew exactly where we were, no matter how hard we tried to disappear. As Emma cried, my mother comforted her, but I knew she was also terrified. My father began to watch the entrance to the cabin every night, armed with a piece of wood he found in the forest. He was exhausted, but determined to keep us alive. I knew we couldn't keep running forever. Diddy didn't just want us back. He wanted to destroy us, and was willing to do the same to anyone who tried to help us. Our parents were in danger because of us, and it ate at me inside. It was then that I made a decision. We needed to expose everything. Diddy only had power because no one dared to speak out. If we could tell our story, maybe there would be a chance to end this persecution before it destroyed us completely. After weeks on the run, we found the courage to go to the police. But it was a decision that only increased our despair. I still remember the police officers explained expressions as we told our story. First, there was shock, then hesitation, and finally that blank look that meant they couldn't or wouldn't help us. One of them even tried to comfort us. These are serious accusations, but you need to understand that you are talking about one of the most powerful people in the country. It's complicated. That was the last straw. We understood that we were alone. No authority would dare challenge Diddy, and any attempt at justice seemed to invite more suffering. We decided to disappear. With the help of our parents, we went to the countryside of the United States, a place far from cameras, parties, and Diddy's reach. We couldn't use our real names or maintain any contact with the world we knew. It was as if we had died. To the rest of the world, for years, we lived like ghosts. Emma took a while to recover. She had nightmares almost every night, waking up screaming, as if we were still trapped in that mansion. I felt destroyed, but I knew I needed to be strong for her. We worked simple jobs and avoided attention, but the fear never completely went away. Every payphone, every car that passed slowly, every stranger who stared for too long, everything seemed like a threat. It was as if Diddy's shadow was always with us, even hundreds of miles away. But time passed, and with it came a spark of hope. Slowly, we began to heal. Our pain gave us a purpose, and we decided to turn our scars into something that could help other people. This is how, years later, we created an NGO dedicated to helping young victims of abuse and trafficking, offering shelter, psychological support, and most importantly, a place where they could feel safe. The work has given us a new meaning. Every time we helped a girl escape a similar situation, it was as if we were recovering a part of ourselves. But we still kept our story secret. Talking about Diddy, even after so long, seemed too dangerous. Then came the news that changed everything. One day, as I reviewed documents to the NGO, Emma entered the room with wide eyes, holding her cell phone. "You won't believe it," she said, her voice full of emotion. "They arrested him. Diddy was arrested." For a moment, I didn't know how to react. That name, which for so long caused me fear and anger, was now associated with something different: the possibility of justice. I read my headline dozens of times, trying to convince myself that it was real. It was at that moment that I decided it was time to tell our story. Not for revenge, but to give strength to other victims who, like us, believed that fighting someone so powerful was impossible. We recorded a video together, me and Emma sitting side by side. As much as fear was still present, we knew we could no longer hide. We tell everything, from the dream that led us to Hollywood to the horrors we live in the hands of Diddy. We exposed the darkest details and explained why we were silent for so long. The video became viral, and the answers were overwhelming. People sent us support messages. Other victims started sharing their stories, and for the first time, we felt we were no longer alone. Today, we finally find a measure of peace. We are not sure if Diddy will face the consequences he deserves, but knowing that he is being investigated and that more people are joining to expose his crimes gives us hope. We still live with scars, but we learn to use them as memories of what we have overcome. And, above all, we know that our voice, the same as he tried to silence, is now helping to illuminate the hidden horrors behind the Hollywood shine. P. Diddy was a monster, but we survived. And with our history, we are helping others to survive as well.